You've spoken in the past of the centripetal and centrifugal forces at work within the FWBO. Could you explain what these terms mean, and also what effect a men's event would have in terms of the centripetal and centrifugal forces?
I think one could look at this idea of centripetal and centrifugal forces in two quite distinct ways. The first of which, at least, is entirely positive. The centrifugal force is the force of expansion. The centrifugal movement is the movement outwards, and from the centre outwards. So that centrifugal movement, that movement of expansion, is quite important for the FWBO. We do have to expand. To the extent that we are a growing movement, we expand. We come into contact with more and more people. More and more people come into contact with us. We spread into more and more countries. But that centrifugal movement of expansion must be balanced, as it were, by a strengthening of the spiritual centre of the movement. Otherwise, if we overstretch, let's say, our lines of communication, spiritually speaking, then we may expand, but we shall be spreading ourselves rather too thinly. So yes, the centrifugal force or tendency, in the sense of the tendency to expand, is definitely a healthy and desirable one, provided it is balanced, so to speak, against that intensification of the centre, which I suppose you could call the centripetal force, provided we were not only trying to spread outwards, but also to go deeper and deeper within. It's a question of not only being a broad movement, a widespread movement, but being a deep movement, a spiritually deep movement with a very deep spiritual foundation. And the more widely we spread, the deeper our foundation needs to be. But then, of course, there is a centrifugal movement or force or tendency in a somewhat more negative sense. That is to say, when people don't feel a very strong pull towards the FWBO in a spiritual sense, when they don't feel a very strong pull towards their communities and co-ops and centres and spiritual practices, and sort of start wondering, whether the grass isn't greener on the other side of the fence. Very often this is an expression of just restlessness and an inability to settle down into the spiritual life. In the same way, the centripetal force can take a slightly negative turn if the FW happens to be turned in too much upon itself and lose sight of the world outside, lose sight perhaps of what other Buddhist groups and movements are doing, lose sight of what is happening in the world, lose sight of, say, the general economic situation and the general needs of people, and be too inward looking. That would be to be centripetal in a somewhat undesirable sense. So we have to adopt a balanced sort of attitude. We have to be in centrifugal and centripetal, in these two different senses.